You can tell everything about a person by the phone they carry, Jonathan Reed said, his voice smooth, confident, and just loud enough for the entire table to hear. And then he laughed, a short, dismissive sound that blended perfectly with the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of million-dollar conversations around him. Because in Jonathan's world, details like that mattered, brands mattered, appearances mattered, and right now, the detail in front of him was almost offensive. Emily Carter stood beside the table, pen poised over her notepad, her posture straight, her expression calm, but her phone, resting quietly in the pocket of her apron, was anything but impressive, the edges worn, the screen faintly scratched, the kind of device most people would have replaced years ago without a second thought. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, the silver of his watch catching the warm light above them. Still using that in 2026, he added, tilting his head slightly as if studying something curious, something outdated. A few of the men at the table chuckled, not because it was particularly funny, but because it was Jonathan, and when Jonathan laughed, people followed. Emily didn't look up right away. She simply finished writing the last item on the order, her handwriting precise, controlled. Then she lifted her gaze, just briefly, meeting his eyes for a fraction of a second, not defensive, not offended, just steady. "Works," she said softly, her voice even, almost quiet enough to disappear into the room. But it didn't. Something about the way she said it lingered, like a note that didn't quite resolve. Jonathan smirked, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. "I'm sure it does," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. To him, everything had a version, an upgrade, a measurable value, and anything that didn't evolve was left behind. Simple as that. He picked up his own phone, sleek, flawless, worth more than most people's monthly rent, and placed it deliberately on the table, screen lighting up with a soft glow. "You ever think about upgrading?" he asked, almost casually, but there was an edge. Beneath it, a quiet test, the kind he didn't even realize he was giving anymore. Emily didn't answer right away. She shifted her weight slightly, balancing the tray in her hand, the ambient light catching the faint reflection in her eyes. "I upgrade when I need to," she said, her tone unchanged, no irritation, no apology, just a statement. Jonathan watched her for a moment longer than necessary. Something about her composure not quite matching the narrative he had already built in his head, but he brushed it off, because people were predictable, patterns were predictable, and he had built an empire reading both. "Right," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We'll take the ribeye, medium rare, 2 orders, and the sea base." Emily nodded, writing it down without hesitation, her movements efficient, practiced, almost effortless, as if the tension at the table didn't exist, as if his words hadn't landed at all. And maybe that was what unsettled him just a little, though he would never admit it. She turned to leave, the faint sound of her steps blending into the polished rhythm of the restaurant. But just as she reached the edge of the table, Jonathan spoke again. "Make sure you don't drop anything," he added, a half-smile playing at his lips, light, almost joking, but not entirely. Emily paused, just for a second, then glanced back over her shoulder, her expression unchanged. "I won't," she said, and then she walked away, disappearing into the flow of servers and shadows, leaving behind a silence that lingered just a beat too long. Jonathan exhaled softly, leaning back again, reaching for his glass, unaware that in less than 10 minutes, the only thing anyone at that table would remember wasn't her phone, but the moment everything shifted, and the sound of his own laughter turning into something else entirely. The conversation at the table resumed almost immediately, as if nothing of importance had happened. Contracts were mentioned, numbers floated casually in the air, 7 figures spoken the way most people spoke about weekend plans. Jonathan Reed leaned forward slightly, his attention returning to the deal in front of him, a potential acquisition that had been months in the making, a cybersecurity startup with a proprietary encryption system his company had been trying to access for over a year. "If we secure this tonight, we close before the quarter ends," one of his partners said, sliding a tablet across the table, the screen filled with dense lines of code and projections. Jonathan nodded, confident, controlled. This was his world, precise and predictable. But then the tablet flickered, just for a second, a subtle glitch that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Except it did not stop there. The screen froze, then reset, the data disappearing into a blank interface. What just happened? Another voice muttered, tension creeping into the edges of their conversation. Jonathan's expression tightened. Not panic. Not yet, but irritation, sharp and immediate. He reached for his phone, tapping quickly, accessing the secure network his company relied on. Except the connection lagged, then failed entirely. That is not possible, he said under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Because systems like his did not fail, not in public, not like this. One of the men stood, already dialing his assistant, his voice low but urgent. Get the tech team on this right now. The calm atmosphere of the restaurant began to shift, not visibly, not to the other diners, but at this table. Something had cracked, something unexpected. Jonathan tapped his screen again, harder this time, as if pressure alone could force the system back into place. It is a temporary glitch, he said, though his tone lacked the certainty it had carried moments ago. Across the room, Emily moved steadily between tables, delivering plates, refilling glasses, her pace unchanged, her expression composed. But as she approached Jonathan's table again, carrying the first round of dishes, her eyes flicked briefly to the tablet, then to his phone. Just a glance, quick, precise. She set the plates down carefully, one by one, the aroma of perfectly cooked steak rising into the air, grounding the moment in something ordinary, something stable. Your ribeye, medium rare, she said softly, placing the final dish in front of him. Jonathan barely looked at it, his attention locked on the unresponsive screen in his hand. We are in the middle of something, he said, not looking up, his voice clipped, controlled, but edged with frustration. Emily nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken, and for a brief moment, she did not move away, her gaze resting on the tablet again, then on his phone, then back to his face. You might want to check your encryption layer, she said quietly. The words simple, almost casual, but they landed with a weight that did not match her tone. Jonathan looked up, finally, irritation flashing across his features. Excuse me, he said, the room around them continuing as if nothing had changed. But at this table, everything had begun to tilt. Emily did not react to his tone. She did not apologize, did not step back. She simply held his gaze for a second longer, calm, steady. It looks outdated, she added, then lowered her eyes slightly, as if the statement was nothing more than a passing observation, and turned to leave. Jonathan stared at her retreating figure, something unfamiliar settling in his chest. Not anger, not exactly, something closer to uncertainty, because for the first time that evening, someone had spoken to him without trying to impress him, without trying to please him, and somehow, without trying at all, she had said the one thing he could not immediately dismiss. Jonathan did not respond immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly as Emily's words echoed in his mind. Outdated encryption. The phrase did not belong in this setting. Not from her. Not delivered with that level of quiet certainty. He glanced down at his phone again, then at the tablet, then back toward where she had disappeared into the flow of the restaurant. That is ridiculous, one of his partners said, attempting to brush it off, but there was hesitation in his voice now, a subtle crack in the confidence they had all carried into this meeting. Jonathan exhaled slowly, steadying himself. This was a technical issue. Nothing more. Systems failed, glitches happened, but something about the timing, the precision of her comment, it lingered. He opened a deeper diagnostic panel on his phone, fingers moving quickly. Practiced, efficient, lines of encrypted data appearing on the screen, except this time, he saw it. A delay, a mismatch in the handshake protocol, small, almost invisible, but enough to disrupt the entire chain. His jaw tightened. Zoom in on that section, he said, sliding the tablet back toward his partner, who complied immediately, enlarging the section of code. The room around them faded slightly, the ambient noise of the restaurant becoming distant, irrelevant. Jonathan leaned closer, studying the structure. And there it was again, a pattern he had seen before, but not like this, not embedded so subtly. That layer should not be there, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, his mind racing now, recalculating, adjusting. Something had been altered, not broken, altered. Call the team again, he said, sharper this time. the control in his voice tightening. But even as he spoke, he knew the response would not come fast enough. Whatever this was, it was happening in real time. And for the first time in a long time, he did not have immediate control over it. Across the room, Emily placed another order on a nearby table, her movements unchanged, her presence almost invisible again. But Jonathan's attention kept drifting back to her. That brief moment, that sentence, it did not fit, it did not belong, and yet it explained more than anyone else at this table had managed to say. He tapped his phone again, accessing a secondary system, one that only he and a handful of engineers even knew existed, a backup layer designed to override external interference. Except when he initiated it, the response stalled, just for a second, then returned an error he had never seen before. His breath caught, not visibly, but enough for the man beside him to notice. "Jonathan," he said quietly. "What is going on?" Jonathan did not answer right away, because for the first time, he did not have one. Instead, his eyes shifted again, scanning the room, searching, until they landed on her. Emily stood near the service station, adjusting a tray, her posture relaxed, her focus seemingly elsewhere. But something about her stillness felt different now, deliberate, aware, as if she had already seen the outcome of something he was still trying to understand. He stood abruptly, the chair sliding back with a soft scrape against the floor, not loud enough to draw attention from the entire room, but enough for his table to fall silent. "I will be right back," he said, his tone controlled again. But underneath it, there was something new, something unsettled. He walked toward her, each step measured, his mind still processing, still resisting the conclusion forming at the edges of his thoughts. When he reached her, she did not look surprised. She simply turned slightly, meeting his gaze with the same calm expression. "What did you mean?" he asked, his voice lower now, no longer performative, no longer for the table, just for her. Emily glanced briefly at the phone in his hand, then back at his eyes, and for a moment, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade completely. "I meant exactly what I said," she replied, her tone steady, almost gentle. "Your system is not broken." She paused, just long enough for the words to settle. "It is just behind." Jonathan held her gaze, searching for hesitation, for uncertainty, for anything that would make her words easier to dismiss. But there was nothing, no arrogance, no attempt to impress, just a quiet certainty that unsettled him more than any technical failure could. "Behind what?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the edge it carried before. Emily shifted slightly, setting a folded napkin back into place on a nearby tray, her movements unhurried, as if time itself did not press on her the way it did on him. "Behind what it thinks it is protecting," she replied, her tone even. Jonathan frowned, the answer not clarifying anything, and yet somehow narrowing the possibilities in his mind. He glanced back toward his table where the tablet still flickered with intermittent errors, his partners watching him now, waiting, uncertain, a position he rarely found himself in. "You were saying someone is inside the system," he said, testing the idea out loud. Emily shook her head once. A small, almost imperceptible motion. "No," she said softly. "I am saying the system is still defending against problems it already solved." The words hung between them, abstract on the surface, but Jonathan's mind began connecting them instantly. Legacy protocols, redundant layers, defensive loops that no longer matched current architecture, things that should have been removed but were left in place out of caution, or habit, or oversight. His expression shifted, not fully understanding yet, but moving closer. "That would not cause a total disruption," he said, more to himself now. Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him for a brief moment, then added, "Not by itself." She paused, just long enough. "But it would if something newer tried to move faster than it." Jonathan's breath slowed, the pieces aligning now, not perfectly, but enough to form a shape. His company had been integrating a new encryption model into their existing system, a hybrid structure designed to increase speed without sacrificing security. But if the older layer was still actively filtering, still resisting, then the newer system would not just slow down. It would conflict, stall, collapse under its own redundancy. He looked down at his phone again, scrolling rapidly, deeper this time, past the surface diagnostics into the underlying architecture. And there it was, clearer now. A recursive loop between two layers that should never have been running simultaneously. His jaw tightened, not in frustration, but in recognition. "We missed it," he said quietly, almost to himself. Across the table, one of his partners called out, "Jonathan, the system is locking us out completely." The urgency in his voice sharper now. Jonathan did not turn immediately, his attention still fixed on Emily. "If you remove the old layer, you risk exposure," he said, testing her again, not mocking this time, but probing. Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "Only if you remove it wrong," she replied. Jonathan studied her for a second longer, then let out a slow breath, something shifting inside him, something subtle but undeniable, because this was no longer about a waitress with an outdated phone. This was about someone who understood a system he had spent years building, at a level that felt uncomfortably close to his own. He straightened slightly, glancing back at his table, then at her again. "And you know how to remove it, right?" he said, not a question, not quite. Emily did not answer immediately. She simply reached into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing against the edge of that same worn device, the one he had laughed at minutes earlier, and for the first time, Jonathan's eyes followed the movement, not with dismissal, but with focus, as if he was finally seeing it for what it might actually be, not old, not irrelevant, just something he did not yet understand. Emily did not rush. She did not dramatize the moment. She simply pulled the phone from her apron pocket and held it in her hand. The same worn edges, the same faint scratches catching the soft light. But now, under Jonathan's gaze, it no longer looked insignificant. It looked deliberate. She unlocked it with a single, fluid motion, the screen lighting up instantly, not lagging, not stuttering, but responding with a speed that felt almost out of place for something so visually outdated. Jonathan noticed that first, the responsiveness, the absence of delay, his eyes narrowing slightly as he leaned in just enough to see. "That is not a standard interface," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Emily did not answer, her fingers moving across the screen with calm precision. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She navigated through layers of what looked like simplified menus, but beneath them, Jonathan could see it. Glimpses of something far more complex, custom-built, stripped down to essentials, efficient in a way that most commercial systems were not. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice lower now. Not commanding, not dismissive, but focused. Emily paused for just a fraction of a second, then glanced at him. "Helping you catch up," she said, her tone soft, but the words landed with quiet weight. Jonathan did not respond. He watched, fully now, as she connected to a network, not through his system, not through any visible channel he recognized, but through something else entirely, something isolated, controlled. Her screen filled with lines of data, clean, structured, nothing like the cluttered interfaces his own team used. She tapped once, then again, and on his phone, the error shifted, not gone, but changing, adapting. "You are interfacing with it," he said, realization creeping into his voice. Emily nodded slightly, her eyes still on the screen. "I am showing it what it is supposed to be," she replied. Jonathan's mind raced, because that was not how systems were fixed, not in real time, not from an external device. Unless the device itself was not external at all, unless it was built to understand the system from the inside out. His gaze dropped back to her phone, really looking now, not at the scratches, not at the casing, but at what it was doing, how it was behaving, and for the first time, a thought formed that he could not immediately reject. This was not an old phone. It only looked like one. Across the room, his partner called again, louder this time. "Jonathan, something is changing. The system is responding." There was a mix of confusion and relief in his voice now. Jonathan did not turn. He stayed where he was, watching Emily, because whatever was happening at that table, it was starting here, in her hands. She made one final adjustment, a small movement, almost invisible, and then she stopped, the screen dimming slightly as she lowered the device. "Try it now," she said. Simple, direct. Jonathan looked at her for a second longer, then turned, walking back to the table with measured steps, his phone already in his hand. He tapped into the system again. And this time, it responded instantly, clean, stable, the delay gone, the conflict resolved, the layers no longer fighting each other. His partner stared at the tablet, eyes wide. "It is back," he said, almost disbelieving. Jonathan did not speak. He stood there, looking at the screen. Then slowly, he lifted his gaze, turning back toward Emily, who had already returned to her work, placing another dish on another table, as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just solved a problem that his entire team could not. His chest tightened slightly, not with panic, not with anger, but with something unfamiliar, something quieter, heavier, because the laughter from earlier, the casual dismissal, it echoed differently now, and for the first time that evening, Jonathan Reed understood that he had not just underestimated a person, he had completely misunderstood the room. Jonathan remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, the glow of the tablet reflecting faintly in his eyes, but his focus was no longer on the data. It had shifted, quietly but completely, across the room. Emily moved between tables with the same calm rhythm as before, her presence blending back into the background, as if the last few minutes had never happened. But for Jonathan, nothing felt the same. He returned to his seat slowly, the leather chair creaking softly beneath him, his partners already speaking again, voices layered with relief and confusion. "We need to figure out what caused that," one said, scrolling rapidly through the restored system. "It just corrected itself," another added, shaking his head slightly. Jonathan did not join in. He picked up his glass but did not drink, his eyes drifting once more toward Emily, replaying the moment, the precision of her words, the way she had not asked for permission, had not explained, had simply acted and solved it. His partner leaned in, lowering his voice. "Jonathan, what did you do?" he asked, curiosity sharp now. Jonathan paused, just briefly, then set the glass down untouched. "Not me," he said quietly, the admission simple, but heavier than it sounded. The table fell silent for a fraction of a second, not because of the words themselves, but because of who had said them. Jonathan Reed did not say things like that, not publicly, not casually. Across the room, Emily finished placing a check on a nearby table, her expression unchanged, her posture steady, and then she turned slightly, as if aware of his attention without needing to meet it directly. Jonathan exhaled slowly, something settling inside him, something that felt unfamiliar, not loss of control, not quite, but a shift in how he understood it. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek business card, the kind that opened doors before he even spoke, and stood again, this time without hesitation. When he approached her, she was wiping down a table, her movements precise, unhurried. She glanced up as he stopped a few feet away, not startled, not impressed, just acknowledging his presence. "Emily," he said, her name deliberate now, no longer just a detail from an order. She nodded slightly. "Waiting? I owe you an apology," he continued, the words measured, controlled, but genuine. The noise of the restaurant continued around them, unchanged, but in that small space between them, everything felt quieter, more focused. Emily tilted her head just slightly, as if considering the statement, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You do," she said softly, not unkind, not sharp, just honest. Jonathan let out a quiet breath, a faint shift in his expression, something closer to humility than he was used to showing. He extended the card toward her. "I would like to talk," he said, "about what you did, about that system." His tone carried no assumption this time, no expectation of compliance, just an offer. Emily looked at the card, then back at him, her gaze steady, thoughtful. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly at the dining room around her, the tables, the people, the quiet rhythm of work that continued without interruption, then back to him. "I am working," she said simply. Jonathan nodded once, accepting that, adjusting. "After your shift," he added, softer now. Emily considered him for a moment longer, then finally reached out, taking the card between her fingers, her touch light, deliberate. She did not look at it right away. She just held it, as if its value did not come from what was printed on it, but from what had already happened. Jonathan watched her, waiting, not pressing, and for the first time that evening, he understood something he had not before. That influence was not always about control. Sometimes it was about being allowed to stay in the conversation at all. Emily slipped the card into her apron pocket, right beside the phone, and met his eyes one more time, calm, steady, Unchanged. We will see, she said. And then she turned, picking up her tray, moving back into the quiet rhythm of the room, leaving Jonathan standing there, not dismissed, not accepted. Just paused, in a way he had never experienced before. The rest of the evening moved forward, but not in the same way. Something subtle had shifted at the table. The conversation returned to numbers and projections, but the rhythm felt different now, less certain, more careful. Jonathan spoke when necessary, his voice still controlled, still precise. But there was a pause between his thoughts that had not been there before, a space where something else now existed, awareness. He finished his meal without really tasting it, the perfectly cooked steak left half untouched, his attention drifting again and again toward the quiet figure moving through the restaurant. Emily did not look at him, not once. She moved from table to table, her focus steady, her presence unchanged, as if nothing had happened, as if she had not altered the course of $1 million deal with a few quiet actions. And that, more than anything, unsettled him, because in his world, value announced itself. It demanded recognition, it reshaped the room, but she had done none of that. She had simply returned to work, as if the moment did not belong to her, as if it was never about being seen. The bill arrived at the table, placed neatly in front of him. Jonathan glanced down at it, then reached for his pen, the motion automatic, familiar, but he paused, just for a second, then added a number that was far beyond the expected, not as a gesture of wealth, not as a display, but something quieter, something closer to acknowledgement. He closed the folder and stood, his partners following, their voices already shifting to the next meeting, the next deal, the next calculation. But Jonathan did not move toward the door immediately. He waited, just long enough, until Emily passed by again, carrying an empty tray. When she reached him, she slowed slightly, not stopping, but not rushing either. He placed the folder gently on the edge of a nearby table, not handing it to her directly, not forcing the interaction, just leaving it within reach. "Thank you," he said, the words simple, but different now, stripped of performance. She glanced at the folder, then at him, her expression calm, unreadable. "For the service," she replied softly, and for a brief moment, there was something almost playful in her tone, not mocking, not dismissive, just balanced. Jonathan let out a quiet breath, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth, not out of amusement, but recognition. She had heard him, she had understood exactly what he meant, and she had chosen how to respond. He nodded once, accepting that, then turned and walked toward the exit, the cool night air meeting him as he stepped outside, the city, moving as it always did, fast, indifferent, alive. But Jonathan did not reach for his phone right away. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting in his pocket, his mind replaying everything, the laughter, the silence, the shift, and somewhere between those moments, something inside him had changed, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to make him question something he had always assumed to be true. That value could be measured at a glance. Behind him, through the glass, Emily continued her work, her movement steady, her world unchanged, or at least it appeared that way. And Jonathan realized, as he finally stepped away from the restaurant and into the rhythm of the city, that the most important thing he had encountered that night was not the deal, not the system, not even the problem that had nearly cost him both. It was the realization that the one person he had dismissed in seconds had seen everything he had missed in years, and she had done it without raising her voice, without asking for anything, without needing him to understand at all. The night air was cooler than Jonathan expected, or maybe it was just the silence that followed him that felt unfamiliar. His driver stepped forward immediately, opening the door of the car with quiet efficiency, but Jonathan did not get in right away. He stood there for a moment longer, looking back through the glass of the restaurant, the warm lights, the polished surfaces, the people still moving inside as if nothing had changed. Except for him, something had. He finally slid into the back seat, the door closing softly behind him, sealing him into a space that usually felt like control, like certainty. But tonight, it felt different. His phone buzzed almost instantly. Messages from his team flooding in, confirmations, reports, questions, system stabilized. One read, "Root conflict identified," said another. "We are implementing a permanent patch." Jonathan stared at the screen, reading each line carefully, but none of it felt as significant as it should have, because the truth was already clear to him. They had not solved it. Not really. They were only catching up to what had already been done. He leaned back slightly, the leather seat firm against his shoulders, his reflection faint in the dark window beside him. And for the first time in a long time, he did not open another app, did not call anyone, did not issue a command. Instead, he just sat there, thinking, replaying the exact moment she had reached into her apron, the way she had held that phone, not like something outdated, not like something temporary, but like something complete, something finished, something he did not need. To understand in order for it to work, his fingers tapped lightly against his knee, a habit when his mind was working through something complex, except this time. It was not a system, not a deal, not a negotiation. It was a person, Emily Carter, a waitress, a name that should have disappeared the moment he left the restaurant. But it did not. It stayed, clearer than anything else from that night. His phone buzzed again, this time from his chief technology officer. "We think this may be related to the prototype we have been trying to acquire." Jonathan paused, reading that message twice, then a third time, his eyes narrowing slightly. The prototype, the one system his company had been pursuing for months, the one built by an unknown developer who had refused every offer, every attempt at acquisition, a system described only in fragments, efficient, adaptive, ahead of anything currently on the market. He looked down at his phone, then slowly, almost unconsciously, his hand moved toward his jacket pocket, feeling for something that was no longer there, his business card, the one he had given her, the connection he had offered, and suddenly, the equation shifted, not fully, not completely, but enough to make a possibility form, quiet, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm when he finally spoke. "Turn the car around," he said. The driver hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised, then nodded. "Yes, sir." The car slowed, then turned smoothly back toward the restaurant. Jonathan's gaze fixed ahead now, not on the city, not on the lights, but on a single, quiet realization that had begun to take shape, that the system he had been trying to buy, the one no one could access, the one no one could fully understand, might not be hidden in a server, or a lab, or a corporation. It might have just walked past him in a black apron, carrying a tray, using a phone he had laughed at. And if that was true, then tonight had not been a disruption. It had been an introduction, one he had almost missed completely. The car came to a smooth stop in front of the restaurant, the same warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk, unchanged, familiar. But Jonathan did not hesitate this time. He stepped out before the driver could reach the door, his pace measured but direct. The quiet certainty from minutes earlier now sharpened into intention. Inside, the rhythm of the dining room continued. Glasses clinked softly, conversations flowed, and Emily moved through it all with the same calm precision. But when she saw him walk back in, something in her eyes shifted, not surprise, not curiosity, just recognition, as if she had expected this. Jonathan approached without waiting, stopping just a few feet away, the noise of the room fading again into the background. "I know what that is," he said, his voice steady, not loud, but certain. Emily tilted her head slightly, her hands stilling for a moment over the tray she held. "Do you?" she replied, her tone gentle, almost neutral. Jonathan nodded once, his gaze focused. "The prototype," he continued, "the one no one can access, the one my company has been trying to acquire." He paused, just briefly. "It is not in a server somewhere, is it?" The question hung there, not demanding, not aggressive, but clear. Emily held his gaze for a second longer, then slowly set the tray down on the nearest table, her movements unhurried, deliberate. She reached into her apron pocket again, pulling out the phone, holding it lightly in her hand. "You were close earlier," she said softly. Jonathan's expression did not change, but something in his posture did, something quieter, more grounded. "You built it," he said, not asking this time. Emily looked down at the device for a moment, her thumb brushing lightly across the edge of the worn casing, then back up at him. "I finished it," she corrected gently, the distinction subtle, but intentional. Jonathan let out a slow breath, the realization settling fully now, not as a shock, but as something undeniable, something that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. "Why here?" he asked, glancing briefly around the restaurant. The tables, the people, the ordinary setting that felt anything but ordinary now. Emily followed his gaze for a moment, then looked back at him. "Because here," she said, her voice calm, steady. "No one is trying to own it." The words landed without force, but they stayed. Jonathan studied her, understanding more than he expected, more than he was used to admitting. "I was not trying to own you," he said, the correction quiet. Emily gave the faintest hint of a smile, not dismissive, not mocking, just knowing. "You were trying to buy something you did not understand," she replied, and this time, there was no edge in it, just truth. Jonathan nodded once, accepting that, not defending, not explaining, just accepting. The space between them settled into something different now, not tension, not imbalance, but something closer to respect. "Come work with me," he said finally, the offer simple, stripped of negotiation, stripped of leverage, just an invitation. Emily looked at him for a moment, really looked this time, as if measuring not his words, but what sat behind them. Then she glanced down at the phone in her hand, then back up at him. "I already am working," she said softly, and there was something almost reflective in her tone. Jonathan let out a quiet breath, a faint smile touching his expression again, not out of victory, not out of control, but understanding. He reached into his pocket, pulling out nothing this time. No card, no offer, just his hand resting there for a second before he lowered it again. "Then maybe I need to learn how to listen better," he said, the words simple, but different now. Emily nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken, then slipped the phone back into her apron pocket, returning to the rhythm of her work, picking up the tray, moving past him without hesitation, without pause. Jonathan watched her go, not following this time, not stopping her, just watching. And as the quiet movement of the restaurant continued around him, he understood something he had never needed to before, that the most powerful shift does not happen when someone speaks louder, or moves faster, or proves more. It happens when someone simply stands where they are, unchanged, and lets the truth reveal itself. And in that moment, Jonathan Reed realized that he had not lost control that night. He had been given something far more rare, a different way to see it.